It was one of those days at the airport where nothing seemed to go right. The kind of day where the coffee tastes burnt, the lines stretch forever, and every screen you look at shows the word delayed in bright orange letters. Terminal 3 was packed with frustrated travelers, all of them stuck in the same situation, all of them wishing they were somewhere else. In the middle of all this chaos, a woman in her early 30s walked through the crowd. She moved slowly, not in any rush, because there was nowhere to rush to. Her flight had been pushed back by 3 hours, and she had already checked the departure board 5 times hoping for some kind of miracle. But the miracle never came. The screen just kept showing the same delay, the same gate number, the same disappointment. She didn't look like anyone special. That's the first thing you would notice about her. Or rather, the first thing you wouldn't notice. She wore a faded gray hoodie that was at least 2 sizes too big for her. Her jeans had small holes near the knees, not the fashionable kind, just the worn-out kind that comes from years of use. Her sneakers were old and comfortable, the kind you keep wearing because they fit your feet just right even though they've lost their color a long time ago. She carried a simple black backpack over one shoulder. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. She looked like a college student, or maybe someone who worked long hours at a job that didn't pay enough. Nobody paid attention to her. Why would they? In an airport full of businessmen in suits, families with screaming children, and tourists taking pictures of everything, she was invisible, just another tired face in the crowd, just another person waiting for a plane that wasn't coming anytime soon. She found an empty seat near gate 24 and sat down with a heavy sigh. The chair was uncomfortable, like all airport chairs, designed to make sure you never get too relaxed. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through it without really looking at anything. Social media posts she didn't care about. News headlines that made her feel worse. Text messages she didn't have the energy to answer. After a few minutes, she put the phone away and just stared at the ceiling. 3 hours. What was she supposed to do for 3 hours? She thought about getting food, but she wasn't hungry. She thought about buying a book from one of the shops, but nothing sounded interesting. She thought about calling her mother, but she didn't want to explain why she was stuck at the airport again, why her life seemed to be full of delays and detours and plans that never worked out the way she hoped. So she just sat there, watching people pass by. There was a father trying to calm down his crying toddler, bouncing the child up and down while looking completely exhausted. There was an old couple holding hands, walking slowly, not caring about the rush around them. There was a young man talking loudly on his phone about some business deal, using words like synergy and leverage, as if they actually meant something. There was a woman in a bright red dress pulling a suitcase that was definitely too heavy for her, the wheels squeaking with every step. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone had a story. And here she was, stuck in the middle of all of it, feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. She stood up and started walking, not because she had a destination, but because sitting still felt worse. Her legs carried her past the coffee shops with their overpriced drinks, past the bookstores with their bestsellers on display, past the gift shops selling keychains and magnets that nobody really needed. She walked past gate 22, gate 21, gate 20, counting them down like they were the seconds on a clock that moved too slowly. And then she saw it. Tucked away in a quiet corner of the terminal, almost hidden behind a row of plastic plants, was a piano. It was an upright piano, not a grand one, and it had clearly seen better days. The black paint was chipped in several places. Some of the keys looked slightly yellow with age. A small handwritten sign was taped to the top that said "Play Me" in cheerful letters, as if the piano was begging for attention, begging for someone to bring it back to life. She stopped walking. Public pianos had become popular in airports over the last few years. She had seen videos online of people playing them, sometimes beautifully, sometimes badly. She had always thought it was a nice idea, a way to bring some humanity to places that often felt cold and impersonal. But she had never actually played one herself. She had never even considered it. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at the piano. A few people sat in the chairs nearby, All of them focused on their phones or their laptops, none of them paying any attention to the instrument. It was just part of the background to them, like the vending machines or the trash cans. Something that existed, but didn't really matter. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. One step, then another, until she was standing right in front of the piano. She reached out and touched the top of it gently, feeling the cool wood under her fingers. Dust came away on her hand. When was the last time someone had played this thing? When was the last time she had played anything? The answer came to her immediately, and it hurt more than she expected. 12 years. It had been 12 years since she had sat down at a piano and actually played. 12 years since she had let herself make music. 12 years since she had decided that dreams were for other people. People with more talent, more money, more luck. She had been good once. Really good. Her teacher had told her she had a gift, that she could go far if she worked hard enough. And she had worked hard. She had practiced for hours every day, learning pieces that made her fingers ache and her heart soar. She had performed in recitals, won small competitions, dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. But life had other plans. Money got tight. Her family needed her to work instead of practice. College was too expensive. One delay led to another. One excuse piled on top of the next. Until one day she woke up and realized that the piano had become a stranger to her. Something she used to know but couldn't remember anymore. She had told herself it was fine. She had told herself she didn't miss it. She had told herself that some dreams are meant to die, so that real life can take their place. But standing here now, looking at this old piano in this crowded airport, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A pull. A whisper. A tiny voice somewhere deep inside her asking a question she had been afraid to answer. What if you just sat down? What if you just tried? Her heart started beating faster. Her palms felt sweaty. This was stupid. She was a grown woman with responsibilities and problems, and a delayed flight to worry about. She wasn't some character in a movie who was going to have a magical moment in the middle of an airport. Real life didn't work that way. But her legs were already bending. Her body was already lowering itself onto the bench. And before she could talk herself out of it, before the fear and the doubt could catch up with her, she was sitting in front of the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, her breath caught somewhere in her throat. The bench creaked under her weight. The keys looked up at her like old friends she had abandoned. The noise of the airport seemed to fade into the background, becoming distant, unimportant. She pressed a single key. The note rang out, clear and bright, cutting through the noise like a knife through paper. It hung in the air for a moment, beautiful and lonely, before fading away into silence, and something inside her woke up. That single note changed something in the air. She could feel it. The sound was imperfect, slightly out of tune, but it was real. It was alive. And for the first time in 12 years, her fingers were touching piano keys again. She sat completely still for a moment, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. What was she doing? Anyone could be watching. Anyone could be judging. She glanced around quickly, checking to see if people had noticed her. But nobody was looking. The businessman 2 seats away was still typing on his laptop, his eyes glued to the screen. A teenage girl nearby was watching something on her phone with earbuds in, completely lost in her own world. An older man was reading a newspaper, turning the pages slowly. Nobody cared about the woman at the piano. Nobody even knew she existed. Somehow, that made it easier. She pressed another key. Then another. Random notes at first. Just testing. Just remembering what it felt like to have the keys respond to her touch. The piano was definitely old. Some of the keys stuck a little, and the sound wasn't as crisp as she remembered from the expensive pianos she used to practice on. But there was something honest about this instrument. It wasn't trying to be perfect. It was just trying to be played. Her left hand joined her right, and suddenly her fingers were moving on their own, finding positions they hadn't found in over a decade. Muscle memory is a strange thing. You can forget a phone number you used to know by heart. You can forget the name of your first-grade teacher. You can forget entire years of your life. But somehow, Your hands remember what your brain has forgotten. She started playing something simple, a melody she had learned when she was 10 years old, one of the first real pieces her teacher had given her. It was meant for beginners, nothing fancy, nothing that would impress anyone at a concert hall. But as the notes came out, one after another, she felt tears forming in the corners of her eyes. This was the sound of her childhood. This was the sound of Saturday mornings spent at the piano, while her mother made breakfast in the kitchen. This was the sound of dreams she had packed away in boxes and shoved into the back of her mind. This was the sound of who she used to be, before life told her to be someone else. She made a mistake. Her ring finger hit the wrong key, and the note came out sour and wrong. She flinched, waiting for the embarrassment to wash over her, waiting for someone to laugh or tell her to stop, but nothing happened. The airport kept moving around her. People kept walking past. The world kept spinning, so she kept playing. The simple melody ended, and without thinking, her hands moved into something else, something harder. A piece she had performed at a recital when she was 16, a piece that had taken her months to learn. Her fingers stumbled at first, tripping over notes they couldn't quite remember. But slowly, painfully, the music started to come back. It was like finding an old photograph buried in a drawer, faded and worn, but still there, still real. A woman walking past slowed down. She was pulling a small carry-on suitcase behind her, and she had been heading toward one of the gates with the hurried pace of someone who was running late. But something made her stop. She stood a few feet away from the piano, her head tilted slightly, listening. After a moment, she pulled her suitcase closer and sat down in one of the nearby chairs. Her eyes fixed on the woman at the piano. The businessman looked up from his laptop. He didn't close it, didn't stop working, but his typing slowed down. His fingers hovered over the keys as his attention split between his spreadsheet and the music filling the air. She didn't notice any of this. Her eyes were half closed now, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The airport had disappeared. The delayed flight had disappeared. The frustration and the tiredness and the feeling of being stuck had all disappeared. There was only the piano. There was only the music. There was only this moment. Right here. Right now. The piece grew more complex. Her right hand danced up the keys, while her left hand provided a foundation beneath it. The two working together like old partners who had been separated for too long. She hit a few more wrong notes, stumbled over a transition she couldn't quite remember. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Something had been unlocked inside her, and it was pouring out through her fingers like water from a broken dam. A little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, with messy brown hair and curious eyes. He pointed at the piano, saying something his mother couldn't hear over the music. She looked up from her phone, ready to tell him to be patient, but then she heard it too. She heard what her son was pointing at, and she stopped talking. She stopped scrolling. She just listened. More people began to gather. Not a crowd, not yet, but a small collection of strangers who had been pulled out of their own worlds by something unexpected. A flight attendant on her way to work paused near a pillar, her rolling bag forgotten beside her. 2 college students stopped their conversation mid-sentence and turned toward the sound. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap, a soft smile spreading across her face. The woman at the piano had no idea she had an audience. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deep inside herself. In a place she had locked away years ago and thrown away the key. But the key had been there all along. It had been waiting for her, waiting for this moment, waiting for a broken piano in a crowded airport to bring her back to life. The music shifted again. Without planning it, without even thinking about it, she transitioned from the classical piece into something more modern. A song she had heard on the radio a few weeks ago. Something popular that everyone knew. But in her hands, it became something different. Something deeper. She added layers and variations, turning a simple pop song into something that felt almost sacred. A man in a business suit stopped walking. He had been on his phone, talking loudly about a meeting he was late for. But the words died in his throat. He lowered the phone slowly, forgetting about the person on the other end, forgetting about the meeting, forgetting about everything except the woman in the gray hoodie, who was making the most beautiful sounds he had ever heard. Someone took out their phone and started recording. Then another person. Then another. Small red lights blinked in the crowd, capturing something that none of them fully understood yet. They just knew they were witnessing something special, something that didn't happen every day, something that deserved to be remembered. The woman's hands moved faster now, building toward something. The music grew louder, more intense, filling every corner of the terminal. It bounced off the walls and the windows and the high ceilings. It wrapped around the travelers and the workers and the children. It made people feel things they couldn't explain, emotions they couldn't name, and still she played, lost in a world of her own creation, unaware that her world was about to change forever. The little boy who had first pointed at the piano was watching with wide eyes, his mouth hanging open in amazement. He tugged at his mother's sleeve again. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. "Is she magic?" His mother looked at the woman at the piano. She looked at the crowd that was growing around her. She looked at the faces of strangers who had stopped their busy lives to listen to something beautiful. "I think she might be," she whispered back, and the music played on. The crowd grew like a wave building in the ocean. What started as a handful of curious strangers had become something much bigger. People were coming from all directions now, drawn by the music that echoed through Terminal 3 like nothing anyone had heard before. They came from the coffee shops and the bookstores. They came from the gates where they had been waiting for their flights. They came from the restrooms and the restaurants and the long hallways that connected one part of the airport to another. And they all stopped when they reached the piano. There must have been 50 people gathered around now, maybe more. They stood in a half circle, some of them close enough to touch the piano if they wanted to. Others hanging back near the edges, standing on their tiptoes to see over the heads in front of them. Nobody talked. Nobody moved. They just watched and listened, completely hypnotized by the woman in the gray hoodie, whose fingers were creating magic out of thin air. She had moved into a piece that nobody recognized. It wasn't classical. It wasn't pop. It wasn't anything that had a name or a category. It was something that came from deep inside her. Something that had been waiting to come out for 12 long years. The melody was sad and beautiful at the same time, like watching the sun set on the last day of summer. It made people think of things they had lost. It made people think of chances they had never taken. It made people think of all the dreams they had given up because life had gotten in the way. An airport security guard had stopped his patrol to listen. He was a big man with broad shoulders and a serious face, the kind of person who looked like he never smiled. But standing there, watching this woman play, something in his expression softened. His eyes grew distant, like he was remembering something from a long time ago. A different life. A different version of himself. A young woman near the front of the crowd was crying. She wasn't making any sound, wasn't drawing attention to herself. The tears just rolled down her cheeks silently, one after another. And she didn't bother to wipe them away. She didn't know why she was crying. She couldn't have explained it if someone had asked. The music had simply reached inside her and touched something that needed to be touched. The woman at the piano still hadn't opened her eyes. She had no idea how many people were watching her. She had no idea that phones were recording her from every angle. That this moment was being captured and saved, and would soon be shared with the world. All she knew was the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. All she knew was the music that was flowing through her like electricity. All she knew was that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely and totally alive. The piece built toward a crescendo. Her left hand pounded the lower keys while her right hand flew across the higher ones. Both hands working together to create something that seemed impossible for one person to play. The sound filled the entire terminal. It rose up to the ceiling and spread out in every direction. People stopped at gates 100 meters away, turning their heads, wondering where that incredible sound was coming from. A pilot walking to his gate stopped in his tracks. He was still in his uniform, his captain's hat tucked under his arm, and he stood frozen in the middle of the walkway, blocking the path of people trying to get past. But he didn't care. He couldn't move. He had heard a lot of music in his life. in concert halls and jazz clubs and symphony orchestras around the world. But he had never heard anything quite like this. There was something raw about it. Something honest. Something that couldn't be taught in any music school. The crowd continued to grow. Airport workers left their posts to come closer. A janitor abandoned his mop and bucket. A woman at a check-in counter stopped helping customers and just stared toward the sound. A group of flight attendants gathered near the back of the crowd, whispering to each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. Someone started recording a live video, streaming the performance to their followers in real time. Within minutes, thousands of people were watching. Comments flooded in from all over the world. Who is she? Where is this? This is incredible. I'm literally crying right now. Someone needs to sign this woman. The comments kept coming, faster and faster. But the woman at the piano knew nothing about any of it. The music shifted again, transitioning seamlessly into something lighter, something that felt like hope. The heavy sadness lifted, replaced by a melody that made people want to smile. It was like watching the clouds part after a storm. It was like taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. The little boy who had asked if she was magic started swaying back and forth, moving with the music, a huge grin spreading across his face. An older gentleman near the side of the crowd took off his glasses and cleaned them with his handkerchief. His hands were shaking slightly. He had been a music teacher for 40 years before he retired, and he had taught hundreds of students in his career. Some of them had been talented, some of them had been dedicated. But only a few, a very few, had possessed what this woman possessed. That rare combination of technical skill and emotional depth. That ability to make people feel something real. He put his glasses back on and watched her with new eyes. This wasn't just someone playing piano. This was an artist. A true artist. And somehow, for some reason, she was sitting at a beat-up old piano in the middle of an airport, playing for strangers who had never heard her name. The crowd had grown to over 100 people now. They spilled out into the walkway, creating a traffic jam of travelers who couldn't get past but didn't really want to. Announcements played over the loudspeaker, calling passengers to their gates, but nobody moved. The flights could wait, the meetings could wait, everything could wait. This moment was more important. A woman in the crowd turned to the stranger standing next to her. "Do you know who she is?" she whispered. The stranger shook his head. "No idea. But she's unbelievable. She has to be famous, right? Nobody plays like that without being famous." But looking at her, looking at the worn hoodie and the old sneakers and the simple backpack sitting on the floor beside the bench, it was hard to believe she was anyone famous. She looked like a regular person. She looked like someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. She looked like everyone and no one at the same time. The music built toward its final moments. Her whole body was moving now, leaning into the keys, pouring every ounce of herself into the performance. Sweat had formed on her forehead. Her breathing was heavy. Her fingers were starting to ache from muscles that hadn't been used in years. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to the end. The final notes rang out through the terminal, high and clear and perfect. They hung in the air like birds frozen in flight. Beautiful and impossible. And then, slowly, they faded away into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire terminal seemed suspended in time, caught between the ending of something magical and the beginning of whatever came next. And then the applause started. It began with one person clapping, then another, and suddenly the whole crowd erupted. People cheered. People whistled. People stomped their feet and shouted things she couldn't understand. The sound of the applause was deafening, bouncing off the walls and the windows, filling every corner of the space. She opened her eyes, and for the first time, she saw the crowd. For the first time, she realized what had happened. For the first time, she understood that everything was different now. Her hands started to shake. She couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain simply refused to accept it. One moment she had been alone, lost in her own world, playing for no one but herself. And now, there were faces everywhere, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all of them looking at her, all of them clapping for her, all of them seeing her in a way she hadn't been seen in years. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pulled them off the keys and placed them in her lap, trying to steady them, but it didn't help. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her face felt hot. Her eyes were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. She wanted to disappear into the crowd and pretend this had never happened. But she couldn't move. The applause continued, rolling over her like a wave she couldn't escape. People were shouting things at her. Beautiful. Amazing. Incredible. The words blurred together into a wall of sound that made her head spin. She had dreamed of this once. When she was young and full of hope, she had imagined what it would feel like to play for a crowd that loved her music. But that dream had died a long time ago. It wasn't supposed to come true in the middle of an airport when she was wearing her oldest clothes and hadn't touched a piano in over a decade. Slowly, the applause began to fade. People lowered their hands. The cheering quieted down. But nobody left. They all stayed exactly where they were, watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was middle-aged, with gray streaks in his hair and kind eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He approached her slowly, carefully, like he was afraid of scaring her away. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Truly extraordinary. I've been listening to music my whole life, and I've never heard anything quite like that." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She just stared at him, still trying to understand what was happening. "Are you a professional?" he asked. "Do you perform somewhere? I'd love to hear you play again." She shook her head. The movement was small, almost invisible, but he noticed it. "No?" He looked confused. "But you play like... I mean, that was world class. Concert hall level. How can you not be a professional?" She finally found her voice. It came out quiet and rough, barely above a whisper. "I'm not anyone," she said. I'm nobody." The words hung in the air between them. The crowd had gone completely silent now, straining to hear the conversation. The man with the kind eyes took another step closer. "That's not true," he said gently. "What I just heard was not the playing of nobody. That was something special, something rare." More people started moving forward. A woman with tears still drying on her cheeks. A young man holding his phone. The screen still showing a recording of her performance. The retired music teacher who had watched her with such intensity. They gathered around the piano, forming a small circle, all of them wanting to know more about the mysterious woman who had just stopped the entire terminal in its tracks. "How long have you been playing?" someone asked. She swallowed hard. "I started when I was 6. My grandmother had an old piano in her living room. She taught me my first song." "And where did you study? Which conservatory?" She almost laughed at the question. Almost. "I never went to a conservatory. I couldn't afford it. I had a teacher when I was young. A local woman who gave lessons out of her home. She believed in me. She told me I could be something special if I kept working." "So what happened?" The question came from the young woman who had been crying. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Why aren't you performing on stages? Why are you here? In an airport, playing like the rest of us have never heard before?" The question hit her harder than she expected. It cracked something open inside her. Something she had kept locked away for so long that she had almost forgotten it was there. She felt the tears coming again, and this time she didn't try to stop them. "Life happened," she said quietly. "I was 17 when my father got sick. Really sick. My mother had to quit her job to take care of him. We needed money. I was the oldest. So I started working, double shifts at a grocery store, nights at a gas station, whatever I could find." She paused, the memories flooding back. Memories she had spent years trying to forget. There was no time for piano anymore, no time for lessons, no time for practice. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once things got better, I would go back to it. But things didn't get better. My father passed away 2 years later, and by then, the dream felt like it belonged to someone else. Some other girl who didn't exist anymore. The crowd was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that terminal. People who had been strangers 5 minutes ago were now connected by this moment, by this woman's story, by the raw honesty pouring out of her. I packed away all my sheet music, she continued. I sold the keyboard I had been using to practice. I told myself it was okay. I told myself that not everyone gets to follow their dreams. Some people have to be practical. Some people have to grow up. She looked down at her hands, still trembling in her lap. I haven't played in 12 years. Not once. I walked past pianos in stores and turned away. I changed the radio station when classical music came on. It hurt too much to remember what I had given up. So why today? The man with the kind eyes asked. Why did you sit down today? 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 She thought about the question. She thought about the delayed flight, and the burnt coffee, and the hours stretching out in front of her with nothing to fill them. She thought about wandering through the terminal, feeling lost and empty and stuck. I don't know, she admitted. I saw the piano sitting here, and something just pulled me toward it. I sat down before I could talk myself out of it, and once I started playing, I couldn't stop. It was like all those years just melted away. Like I was 17 again. Before everything fell apart, the retired music teacher stepped forward. His eyes were red, and his voice cracked when he spoke. I taught music for 40 years, he said. I've seen hundreds of students come through my classroom. Only a handful had what you have. That gift doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear just because you stop using it. It waits for you, and today, it finally got to come back out. She looked up at him, her face wet with tears. You really think so? I know so, he said. What you did just now, after 12 years of not playing, that's not normal. That's not luck. That's something that was meant to be. Cruz, the little boy who had called her magic, pushed through the legs of the adults surrounding her. He walked right up to the piano bench and looked at her with those big, curious eyes. Are you sad? He asked in that honest way that only children can. She smiled through her tears. A little bit, she said. But I think I'm also happy. Does that make sense? He thought about it seriously. His small face scrunched up in concentration. Then he nodded. My mom cries when she's happy too, he said. She says that's what happens when you feel a lot of things at the same time. She laughed. A real laugh. The first real laugh she had felt in longer than she could remember. Your mom sounds very smart, she said. The boy grinned. Then, without warning, he threw his small arms around her in a hug. She froze for a moment, surprised by the gesture. Then she hugged him back, holding on to this small moment of kindness from a stranger, feeling something shift inside her chest. When she looked up, she saw that almost everyone in the crowd was recording her now. Phones everywhere, pointed at her face, capturing her tears, her smile, her story. She had no idea that those recordings would change her life forever. She eventually made her flight, 3 hours late, exhausted from crying, and completely overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She found her seat by the window, put in her earbuds, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of all those strangers staring at her. She heard the applause echoing in her ears. She felt the little boy's arms wrapped around her in that unexpected hug. What had she done? She landed late that night and went straight home to her small apartment. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her backpack by the door, and collapsed onto her bed without even changing her clothes. She was tired in a way she had never been tired before, not just physically, but emotionally. It felt like someone had reached inside her chest and rearranged everything. And now she didn't know where anything belonged anymore. She fell asleep with her phone still in her pocket, not knowing that the world was already starting to change around her. When she woke up the next morning, she had 237 missed calls. She stared at her phone, certain she was still dreaming. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. The number was still there. 237. And the notifications kept coming. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails flooding her inbox faster than she could count. Voicemails stacking up one after another. Her hands were shaking again as she opened her social media app. She hadn't posted anything in months. She barely used it except to scroll mindlessly when she was bored. But when the app loaded, she saw something that made her drop her phone onto the bed. She was everywhere. Videos of her playing in the airport had been posted by dozens of different accounts. Some of them had millions of views. Millions. The comments were endless, scrolling faster than she could read them. People from every corner of the world were talking about her. They were calling her the airport piano lady. They were calling her a hidden genius. They were calling her the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers and started scrolling through the messages. News stations wanted to interview her. Radio shows wanted her to call in. A morning television program had already reached out, asking if she could fly to their studio by the end of the week, and then she saw the email that made her heart stop. It was from a music producer, a real one, someone whose name she recognized from album covers and award shows, and all the dreams she used to have when she was young. The email was short and direct. He had seen the video. He was moved by her story. He wanted to meet with her. He thought she had something special, something the world needed to hear. She read the email 3 times, convinced she was misunderstanding something. This didn't happen to people like her. This didn't happen to women in their 30s who worked ordinary jobs and wore old hoodies and had given up on their dreams over a decade ago. This happened to other people. Lucky people, special people, but the email was real, and so were all the others. Over the next few days, her life became a blur. She did her first interview on a local news channel, sitting nervously in front of bright lights, while a reporter asked her questions she didn't know how to answer. She watched the clip later and barely recognized herself. She looked scared and overwhelmed and completely out of her depth. But people loved it. They said she was authentic. They said she was real. They said she was a breath of fresh air in a world full of polished, perfect performances. More opportunities followed. A charity asked her to perform at their annual fundraiser. A music school invited her to speak to their students. A podcast with millions of listeners wanted to feature her story. Each opportunity felt bigger than the last, and each one terrified her more than she could say. But she said yes to all of it, because somewhere deep inside, she knew that this was the second chance she had never expected to get, and she wasn't going to waste it. The meeting with the producer happened 2 weeks after the airport. She took a train to the city, wearing the nicest clothes she owned, which still weren't very nice. She walked into his studio with her heart pounding and her palms sweating, convinced that he would take one look at her and realize he had made a mistake. But he didn't. He sat her down at a beautiful grand piano, the kind she had only ever seen in photographs, and asked her to play. So she played. She played the same piece she had played in the airport, the one that came from somewhere deep inside her. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I've worked with a lot of talented people," he finally said. "But talent isn't what makes someone special. It's heart. And you have more heart than anyone I've heard in a very long time." He offered her a chance to record an album. A real album. With professional equipment and experienced musicians and everything she would need to share her music with the world. She sat in that studio, surrounded by instruments worth more than everything she owned, and cried for the 3rd time that month. The album took 6 months to make. She poured everything into it. All the pain and the loss and the years of silence. All the dreams she had buried and the hopes she had given up. She played until her fingers ached and her back hurt, and she couldn't feel her arms anymore. And when it was finally finished, she listened to it alone in her apartment and realized that she had created something she was proud of. Something that was truly hers. The album released to more attention than she ever could have imagined. Critics called it haunting and beautiful. Listeners said it made them cry, made them think, made them want to chase the dreams they had abandoned. It wasn't a massive commercial hit. It didn't top any charts or break any records, but it found its audience. It found the people who needed it most. She started performing again. Small venues at first, then bigger ones. Each time she sat down at a piano in front of an audience, she felt that same fear she had felt in the airport, but she also felt something else. Something stronger than the fear. She felt alive. A year after that day in Terminal 3, she received a letter. It came in a small envelope with no return address, and inside was a single piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. A piano, a woman with brown hair, a crowd of stick figures with smiles on their faces. At the bottom, in messy handwriting that could only belong to a child, were 4 words: "You are still magic." She recognized it immediately. The little boy from the airport. Somehow, his mother had found a way to reach her. She held that piece of paper in her hands and felt the tears coming again. The good kind. The kind that meant she was feeling too many things at once. She framed the drawing and hung it above her piano at home. It stayed there as a reminder. A reminder that magic doesn't disappear just because you stop believing in it. A reminder that second chances can come from the most unexpected places. A reminder that sometimes, the best thing you can do is sit down at a broken piano in a crowded airport and play. She still thinks about that day sometimes. About the delayed flight that felt like the worst thing in the world. About the dusty piano tucked away in the corner. About the moment she pressed that first key and felt something inside her wake up after 12 years of sleeping. She didn't know it then, but that was the day her life started over. That was the day she stopped being nobody and started being herself again. All because she had the courage to sit down and play.